You know that exhaustion, don't you? The one that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got. It's the tiredness that comes from holding yourself together, from maintaining the smile, from making sure nobody sees the cracks. You've become so good at it, so practiced at the performance. Every morning you put on the armor. Not physical armor, but something heavier. The I'm fine, everything's fine routine, the capable one, the strong one. The one who doesn't need help, doesn't break down, doesn't admit the weight. And here's the thing, it works. People believe you. They see exactly what you show them. But you know the truth, don't you? You know what it costs to keep that wall standing, the constant vigilance, the monitoring of every word, every expression, every moment someone might glimpse what's underneath. You've organized your entire life around one principle. Don't let them see you hurt. Don't give anyone the power to wound you. Stay protected, stay defended, stay safe. But let me tell you something about that armor you're wearing. The very thing you built to protect yourself from pain, it's become the thing that keeps you imprisoned by it. Now, here's what most people don't understand about pain. They think if they just avoid it long enough, manage it carefully enough, suppress it deeply enough, it will eventually disappear. Like an unwanted guest who'll leave if you refuse to answer the door. But pain doesn't work that way. I remember watching someone once, a friend who prided themselves on never showing weakness, never crying, never complaining, never admitting struggle. They called it strength, they called it resilience, but I saw something else. I saw someone building a pressure chamber inside themselves, sealing it tighter with every refused feeling, every swallowed hurt, every I'm fine. That was actually a lie. Because you see, when you refuse to feel something, it doesn't vanish. It relocates. It moves from your conscious awareness into the underground rivers of your psyche, where it flows in darkness, shaping everything from beneath. Like those buried landmines from old wars, still active, still dangerous, waiting to be triggered by the slightest pressure. Carl Jung understood this. He watched people spend their entire lives running from their own shadows, and he saw what that running cost them. Not peace, not protection, but a different kind of prison, one built from the inside. Think about it this way. Every emotion you refuse to feel becomes a ghost in your psychological house. And ghosts don't rest quietly. They rattle chains. They move furniture. They make their presence known in anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, in rage that erupts at small things, in sadness that ambushes you on perfectly good days. You become a hostage to your own defense mechanisms. The hypervigilance that scans every room for danger. The people-pleasing that tries to control how others feel so they won't hurt you. The emotional shutdown that mistakes numbness for strength. And the cruelest part, you start to believe you're in control. That if you just manage yourself perfectly enough, if you just maintain the performance flawlessly enough, if you just keep everyone at the right distance, nothing will touch you. But here's the truth that shatters that illusion. The pain you're avoiding isn't waiting outside the walls you've built. It's already inside with you, growing stronger in the darkness, feeding on your refusal to look at it. If you know this feeling, type "I relate to it" below. Let me tell you something that might sting at first, but will set you free if you let it. What hurts you isn't actually out there. I know. You're thinking about that person who betrayed you, that criticism that gutted you, that rejection that confirmed your worst fears. You're certain the pain came from outside, from them, from what they did or didn't do. But here's what I've come to understand. What Jung spent his life trying to show us: external events don't create your pain, they activate it. Think of it like a tuning fork. Strike one tuning fork tuned to a specific frequency, and across the room another fork tuned to that same frequency will begin to vibrate in response. Not because the first fork touched it, but because something in its structure resonates with that particular sound. The same criticism that devastates you might bounce harmlessly off someone else. Not because they're stronger or more enlightened, but because they don't have an unhealed wound tuned to that exact frequency. When someone's offhand comment ruins your entire week, when their silence confirms your deepest fear, when their judgment feels like it's revealing a terrible truth about you, what's really happening? They're striking a tuning fork, yes, but the pain you feel is coming from the matching frequency inside you, the wound that was already there, waiting. I once knew a woman who could handle almost anything, except being excluded. Criticism? Fine. Conflict? She could navigate it. Failure? She'd bounce back. But the moment she sensed she was being left out, even slightly, even in situations that didn't matter, she'd spiral. The pain was so disproportionate to the trigger that it was obvious something else was speaking. Some old wound that had nothing to do with the present moment. This is what Jung meant by projection and shadow work. We project our unexamined pain onto the external world and then spend our lives trying to control the world so it won't activate what we refuse to heal. As long as you believe others control your emotional state, you remain powerless. You're perpetually at the mercy of what people say, what they think, whether they approve or disapprove, include or exclude, stay or leave. You bargain with life. If I'm good enough, successful enough, lovable enough, perfect enough, then I'll be safe. Then nothing will hurt. But no amount of external perfection can protect an internal wound. The better strategy isn't building higher walls. It's healing what's inside those walls so there's nothing left for the world to activate. Jung said something that should unsettle every person who hears it. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Read that again. Let it land. Most of what drives your behavior, your reactions, your choices, isn't happening in the part of your mind you can see. It's happening in the vast psychological basement you've been throwing things into your entire life. The feelings you couldn't handle, the memories too painful to process, the parts of yourself you decided were unacceptable. You think you're making conscious choices, but you're often running scripts written decades ago by a younger version of you who was just trying to survive. This is the uncomfortable truth. You are not as in control as you think you are. That rage that erupts from nowhere when someone criticizes you, that's not about the criticism, that's about the wound beneath it, the one you've been running from since childhood. The inexplicable anxiety that floods you on good days, that's the unconscious reminding you it's still there, still unprocessed, still controlling things from the shadows. I've watched people repeat the same relationship pattern 5, 6, 7 times. Different partners, same story. They genuinely don't understand why they keep choosing people who abandon them or betray them or can't commit. But if you look closer, if you're willing to see what's beneath the surface, the pattern makes perfect sense. Because you see, the unconscious doesn't just store pain, it seeks to resolve it. And in its strange logic, it keeps recreating the original wound, hoping this time you'll heal it. This time you'll finally face what you've been avoiding. The problem is you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You can't integrate what you refuse to see. Think of it like this. You're walking through your life wondering why you keep tripping, but you won't look down. You won't examine the ground. So you just keep stumbling over the same obstacles, blaming the path, blaming others, never seeing that the obstacle is something you're carrying with you. Jung understood that repression doesn't eliminate anything, it just hands control to the parts of you that operate in darkness, and those parts are powerful. They shape your attractions, your aversions, your compulsions, your fears. They whisper interpretations of events that feel like truth but are actually old stories playing on repeat. The unconscious is not the enemy, but unconsciousness is. Not knowing what's driving you, what's running you, what's making your choices for you while you believe you're free. That's the trap, that's the prison that feels like protection. There's a dangerous fantasy a lot of people carry. It goes like this: if I just build myself strong enough, hard enough, impenetrable enough, nothing will hurt me anymore. They confuse strength with shutdown, resilience with disconnection, protection with emotional death. I remember a man who told me proudly that he'd reached the point where nothing bothered him anymore. He'd been through betrayals, losses, disappointments, and he'd emerged untouchable. Or so he thought. But when I watched him live, I saw something else. I saw someone who couldn't feel joy either, couldn't connect deeply, couldn't be moved by beauty or touched by love. He hadn't become invulnerable, he'd become numb, and he'd convinced himself that numbness was victory, because you see, there are two kinds of strength. There's the brittle armor kind, the kind that works through rigidity and resistance. Build the walls thick enough, keep everyone far enough away, never let your guard down, and you'll be safe. But brittle things crack, and when they crack, they shatter completely. Then there's the other kind of strength, the kind Jung called individuation. Not hardening yourself against life, but integrating yourself so completely that nothing external can fragment you. Think about trees that survive storms. It's not the rigid ones. Those snap. It's the ones with deep roots and flexible branches, the ones that can bend without breaking because they're anchored in something below the surface. True strength isn't about keeping things out. It's about having processed and integrated what's already inside. When you've faced your shame, when you've sat with your grief, when you've acknowledged your fear and rage and brokenness, when you've brought all of it into conscious relationship instead of keeping it locked in the basement, something remarkable happens. You become genuinely difficult to wound, not because you've built walls, but because you've left nothing unexamined that others could weaponize against you. The insult that would have destroyed you before, you've already had that conversation with yourself. You already know that part of you. So when someone else points it out, it doesn't land the same way. It's not a revelation, it's old news. But the person who spent their life building armor, keeping everything at bay, refusing to look inside, they're terrified because they don't know what's in there. And they suspect it's terrible, so they defend and defend and defend, exhausting themselves while calling it strength. The irony is profound. The one trying to protect themselves stays vulnerable. The one willing to face themselves becomes free. So what does it actually look like to integrate rather than defend? Jung called it individuation, but don't let the word intimidate you. At its core, it's simple. It means bringing all the parts of yourself, every fragment you've scattered and hidden and denied, back into conscious relationship. The parts you're proud of and the parts you're ashamed of, the noble impulses and the petty ones, the strength and the neediness, the light you show the world and the shadow you've been hiding. Most people live fragmented. They've got their public self, the one they perform for others. Then there's the private self, slightly more honest but still curated. And then there's the secret self, the one they barely admit to themselves, the thoughts they'd never speak, the feelings they've labeled unacceptable, all that energy spent keeping those selves separate, making sure they never contaminate each other. It's exhausting. It's like running 3 different software programs simultaneously, each one demanding resources, each one contradicting the others. Integration says, what if you stopped? What if you brought it all to the table, not to celebrate the ugly parts or indulge them, but simply to acknowledge they exist, to see them clearly, to understand where they came from and what they're trying to tell you. I knew someone who spent years terrified of their own anger. They'd constructed an entire personality around being nice, agreeable, never causing conflict, but the anger didn't disappear, it just went underground. It leaked out in passive aggression, in sudden cold withdrawals, in resentment that poisoned relationships slowly instead of clearing the air quickly. Then one day, they stopped running from it. They sat with their anger, they asked it questions. They traced it back to its source. And something shifted. Not that the anger disappeared, but it lost its power to control them. Because they'd brought it into consciousness, they'd integrated it. And here's the paradox: the moment you own something about yourself, it stops owning you. The person who admits their neediness stops being controlled by it. They can ask for what they need directly. instead of manipulating for it indirectly. The person who acknowledges their selfishness can choose generosity consciously rather than performing it resentfully. You become untouchable not by building walls, but by leaving nothing unexamined that could be used against you. When you've already faced your worst qualities, when you've already acknowledged your deepest fears and most embarrassing truths, what can anyone tell you about yourself that you haven't already integrated? The external critic loses power because you've already been the internal one and you've met yourself with honesty instead of condemnation. This is freedom. Not the freedom from pain, but the freedom from being controlled by it. Now let me tell you something about pain that nobody wants to hear. It's not the enemy. I know. Everything in you resists that statement. We're conditioned from birth to treat suffering as a malfunction, something to be eliminated, numbed, avoided at all costs. But Jung saw it differently. He talked about the lady in black, the figure of depression or anxiety or grief that visits us. We slam the door in her face. We pretend she's not there. We turn up the music and distract ourselves and do anything to avoid letting her in. But she doesn't leave. She just keeps knocking. And the longer we refuse her, the louder the knocking becomes, until it's all we can hear. What if, Jung asked, we invited her in? What if we asked her why she's here? What message is she carrying that we need so desperately to avoid? Because you see, pain is information. It's the psyche's way of saying, something here needs attention. Something here is unresolved. Something here is trying to become conscious. The grief that wells up at unexpected moments, it's not attacking you. It's showing you where love still lives, where attachment still matters, where healing hasn't yet happened. The anxiety that floods you before certain situations, it's not proof you're broken. It's a messenger pointing to beliefs you're carrying, often beliefs formed when you were too young to question them. The shame that makes you want to hide, it's not the truth about your worthlessness. It's a signal that you've internalized someone else's judgment, and it's time to examine whether it's actually yours. But here's what happens when we spend our lives avoiding pain. It mutates. The grief that wasn't felt becomes numbness, an inability to feel anything deeply. The fear that wasn't examined becomes control, a compulsive need to manage every variable. The shame that wasn't processed becomes perfectionism, an exhausting performance that's never quite good enough. Pain intensifies not because of the original wound, but because of the energy we spend resisting it. What we resist persists. What we feel, we can heal. I watched someone finally stop running from their pain. They'd spent decades busy, filling every moment, never stopping, never sitting still. Because stillness meant feeling, and feeling meant confronting everything they'd been fleeing. Then life forced a stop. Illness maybe, or loss, or just exhaustion. And in that forced stillness, the pain they'd been avoiding caught up. And it was terrible for a while. It was everything they'd feared. But then something unexpected happened. They asked their pain what it wanted. They listened instead of running. And slowly, gradually, the pain began to shift, not disappear, but transform. It became less about suffering and more about understanding, less about being punished and more about being taught. The pain had been trying to show them something for years, and the moment they stopped fighting it and started listening, it could finally deliver its message. I need to be honest with you about something. This path of becoming conscious, of integrating your shadow, of healing instead of hiding, it comes with a cost. And the cost is loneliness. Not forever, but for a while. And you need to know that going in. Because here's what happens when you start waking up. You realize how many people around you are still asleep. And I don't mean that in some superior, enlightened way. I mean it practically. You've been wearing a mask your whole life. The persona, Jung called it. The acceptable face you show the world. And people have relationships with that mask. They know it. They're comfortable with it. They've organized their expectations around it. Then you start peeling it away. You start showing up more honestly. You stop performing the old roles. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You stop laughing at things that aren't funny to protect others' comfort. You stop shrinking to make room for people who never made room for you. And some people won't like it. They'll say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. They'll want the old you back, the one who was easier to be around because you didn't challenge them to look at themselves. I knew someone who went through this. They'd spent years being the fun one, the one who made everything light, who never brought problems or heaviness into the room. That was their role, that was their value. Then they started doing their inner work. They started being honest about their struggles. They started setting boundaries. They started saying no. And their friend group fell away, one by one. Not with drama, usually, just with distance, unreturned calls, excuses about being busy, a gradual fading that hurt more than a clean break would have. Because you see, relationships built on false selves can't survive the emergence of true selves, not from cruelty, but from incompatibility. This is not about being better than anyone. It's about being at different developmental stages. Someone committed to unconsciousness will feel threatened by someone pursuing awareness, not always, but often. Because your healing reminds them of their refusal to heal. Your growth highlights their stagnation, and there's a period, sometimes a long one, where you're between worlds. You've left the old you behind, but haven't yet found your people, the ones who love the real you, not the performed version. It's lonely. I won't lie to you about that. But here's what I've learned. This loneliness is not isolation. It's solitude. And solitude is necessary for genuine connection later. You have to meet yourself alone before you can meet others authentically. You have to know who you are when no one's watching before you can truly be seen when they are. The loneliness is not abandonment. It's maturation. It's the necessary passage between who you were and who you're becoming. And on the other side of it, if you keep going, you'll find something you've never had before. Relationships built on truth instead of performance. But you have to walk through the loneliness first. There's no way around it. So after all of this, what actually protects you? If armor doesn't work, if avoidance doesn't work, if numbness doesn't work, what does? Consciousness. That's the answer. Awareness itself. Not as a barrier between yourself and the world, but as an expansion that includes and transcends both. Think of it like this. Imagine you're swimming in the ocean, staying right at the surface where every wave batters you, where you're tossed by every current, where the weather determines your entire experience. That's unconscious living, reactive, controlled by circumstances, at the mercy of whatever life throws at you. Now imagine diving deep, down where the water is calm. Even while storms rage on the surface, you can still see the surface. You can still feel the currents, but they don't control you the same way. You have perspective. You have depth. That's consciousness. Not avoiding the waves, but having a dimension of yourself that remains stable regardless of what's happening on the surface. Jung understood that knowing yourself, truly knowing yourself all the way down, is the only real protection, because when you know your triggers, they lose their power. The criticism still lands. You still hear it, but instead of it triggering an unconscious wound that sends you spiraling, you recognize it. Ah, this is activating my father's disapproval pattern. This is hitting my fear of inadequacy. This is the old story about not being enough. And in that recognition, something shifts. It's no longer controlling you. You're observing it. You're watching your own reaction from a place that isn't swept away by it. This is the difference between reactive and responsive living. The unconscious person is a puppet to circumstances. Something happens, they react, they're pulled by invisible strings they don't even see. The conscious person feels everything just as intensely, but there's a gap between the feeling and the action, a space where choice lives, where they can observe. I'm feeling rage right now, without becoming the rage. I'm feeling fear without letting the fear make the decision. Jung said it clearly. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. When you stop fighting your fear, your shame, your anger, your grief, and instead bring them into full awareness, observe them, understand them, integrate them, they lose their tyrannical power. They become part of your inner landscape instead of invaders you're constantly defending against. And this is how you become genuinely untouchable. Not through walls, but through depth. Not through hardness, but through integration. Not through avoiding pain, but through having already walked through it consciously, having already processed it, having already learned what it came to teach. The external world doesn't change. People will still criticize. Rejection will still happen. Loss will still come. But your relationship to all of it transforms completely. Because consciousness is the only shield that doesn't require defending. It just is. Constant, stable, aware. So here we are, at the end of this particular journey, but really at the beginning of yours. Let me bring it all together one more time. Nothing will ever protect you from life's pain. No amount of control, no perfect performance, no walls thick enough. That's the truth you probably already knew but were hoping wasn't real. But here's the other truth, the one that changes everything. Consciousness transforms your relationship to pain entirely. Remember that image from the beginning? The exhausted armor wearer holding themselves together, terrified of cracking? You can set that down now. Not because you're giving up protection, but because you're choosing something better. Depth over defense. Integration over fragmentation. Awareness over avoidance. The person who's done this work, who's brought their shadow into the light, who's integrated their pain instead of hiding from it, who's made the unconscious conscious, they move through the world differently. Not harder, not colder, not more defended, but clearer, more whole, more genuinely themselves. They can dive deep when the surface storms, down to the calm water that's always there, that was always there, but that they couldn't access while they were frantically treading water at the surface. Jung's individuation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming who you really are beneath the masks, the wounds, the defense mechanisms, the performances. It's about gathering all the scattered pieces of yourself you've been hiding and saying, "This is me, all of it, the light and the shadow, and I'm no longer going to fragment myself to make others comfortable. This path isn't easy. I won't lie to you about that. It requires daily courage, the courage to choose awareness over avoidance, the courage to feel what you've been running from, the courage to sit with your pain and ask it what it's trying to teach you, the courage to be alone for a while as you shed the false self and wait for the real you to emerge. But the freedom on the other side is worth every moment of discomfort, the freedom to be genuinely yourself, the freedom to be touched by life without being controlled by it, the freedom to love deeply without the terror that losing it will destroy you. The simple fact that you've made it this far, that you've stayed with this message, that you're still here, it means something. It means awareness has already begun in you. The questioning has started, the awakening is underway. So here's what I'm suggesting. Keep going. When the unconscious patterns show up, and they will, notice them. When the old wounds get activated, and they will, investigate them. When you feel the pull to numb or avoid or defend, pause. Ask yourself what you're protecting. Ask yourself what you're afraid to see. Make consciousness your practice. Not once, not as a destination you reach, but as a daily choice. The choice to see clearly, to feel fully, to integrate honestly. And if this resonates with you, if something in these words landed, type below, "I choose awareness," not as a comment, but as a commitment to yourself, to the path ahead. Because this video is just the beginning. Your real work starts when you close this and return to your life. When you take these insights and apply them to your actual days, your actual relationships, your actual pain. You're not the same person who started watching this. Something has shifted, even if it's subtle. Awareness has entered. And awareness, once invited in, doesn't leave. Nothing will ever hurt you again. Not because pain won't come, but because you'll finally understand it's been trying to teach you something all along. And the student who's ready to learn can transform any lesson into wisdom. The choice is yours. It always has been. Choose awareness. Choose integration. Choose to become whole. The journey begins now.